How was, you're a maritime historian.
Right.
How was it that you decided to write about this battle?
I'm always looking for the untold story. And I came here from New York 8 years ago and kind of stumbled across this. There's a parade in Essex every year for the last 50 years. It's officially called Commemoration Day, but some people tongue-in-cheekly call it Losers' Day Parade. And I thought, any town that celebrates the worst day in its history with the parade, there's got to be something going on here. And the whole story was only known through folklore, old newspaper articles, some badly written, bits from people who read something on Wikipedia and tried to write an article about it, and it was all wrong. And I went to a convention in 2009, a big maritime convention up at Mystic, and then the U.S. Navy was unveiling its plan for the War of 1812 bicentennial. So I was sitting there expecting them to tell how they were going to include Essex. And they didn't mention us at all. They mentioned Stonington. And I went and talked to the officer afterwards, and I said, Essex had this pretty major battle. And he said, well, we never read the book. It's not on our radar. You're not on our list. And I was like, so the battle never happened. We're not on their list.
Well, the war was so big. This was just one small battle, but so, it was a huge battle.
It was, and so that was sort of the challenge from me to get us on the map. And a funny little story is that I went back to the museum and I was given a little pamphlet, a little 20-page booklet, yellow, dog-eared, that was published by the Essex Historical Society in 1981. And so in 1980, up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, there was a convention of maritime historians. And a fellow named Al Dock, who was a retired naval officer in Essex, went to that. He was interested. And he was sitting there having lunch with a Canadian retired admiral. And they were chatting. And when Al Dock said he was from Essex, the British officer said, wow, the Canadian officer said, wow, what a small world. My great-great-grandfather got a medal for visiting your town in 1814. He was part of the British raiding force. And Al Dock was amazed, saying, wow, that's great. We have this parade, we have a couple of cannonballs, but no one knows much about the battle.
So describe that battle. It's a sneak attack coming up the Connecticut River. Who's involved? How many ships went down? To
set the stage. So by 1814, we're 2 years into the war with Britain, and the British had they had a gigantic navy. So they had Long Island Sound blockaded. In particular, they were blockading New London because one of our greatest naval heroes had an American squadron in New London. The British were trying to prevent him from getting back out to sea. So that choked all the commerce along the Connecticut coast. So in villages like Essex, which was called Pettipog at the time, and it was a shipbuilding town, and we traded with the West Indies and we traded with Great Britain. But with our commerce choke, we started building privateers. And privateers are nothing to do with pirates. Everybody says, oh, it's pirates. That's Disney stuff. This is, privateers is you get a license from the president, and you can build your own warship. And then you're licensed to go out and try to capture a British merchant ship. And your officers wear uniforms and you fly an American flag. It's just like a warship, only it's owned by private investors. You capture a British merchant ship, you don't want to sink it because then you don't get anything. You capture it, you bring it back to an American port, it's evaluated, it's sold at auction along with its cargo, and the owners of the ship, the investors, and the captain and the crew get a portion of the money. So it's just a great way to spark entrepreneurial patriotism. So the British knew that we were building privateers up in Essex, but they couldn't reach us because Essex is 6 miles up the Connecticut River, and there's this massive sandbar at the mouth of the river off of Saybrook. It's called the Saybrook Bar, because the river starts up at the Canadian border.
Which some people don't know, but it starts way up, right?
410 miles up. It flows through 4 states. And every day as the silt, from the 400-mile watershed, reaches the incoming tide at Saybrook, because the tide is coming right in from the ocean at the race, and that stops the river twice a day and it drops the silt, which makes this massive sandbar. And until it was dredged properly in the late 1800s, you couldn't get a decent-sized ship, which is why Connecticut River is one of the only few rivers in the world that doesn't have a major industrial city at its mouth. We don't, because you could never build factories there, which is why the Connecticut River is so pristine. So now you've got the British wanting to get our privateers that we're building, but they can't get a warship up, and we knew that. So by a very interesting happenstance, the president was always trying to figure out ways to inspire people to act against the British. He offered a bounty. Any American private citizen who could blow up a British warship would be given half of its value. So imagine a bunch of young bucks in Stonington saying, yeah, we're going to load a couple rowboats up full of gunpowder and we're going to row out there at night and blow us up a British ship and get paid half its value. It would be like blowing up the aircraft carrier Nimitz now and getting paid half its value.
Right, right.
Well, this really ticked the British off because now you've got American citizens, being with an incentive to do, quite frankly, terrorist attacks on Navy vessels. So on one of these raids, the British captured an American rowing around at night, rowing around with rags tied around his oars so he didn't make any noise. And they slapped him in chains in one of the British ships. And about a week or so later, he knew that he'd probably be hung. And he said, hey guys, I've got an idea for you. I can guide you up to Pettipog, where they're building the privateers, if you save my life. And Captain Capel, the British officer in charge of the squadron, says, if you get my men up to Pettipog, I'll do more than save your life. I'll pay you a lot of money. So now the British have a willing American trader, and his identity has been unknown for 200 years, and we finally found that as part of this project. So the British, he's got to choose, Captain Capel's got to choose a man to lead this raid, and he chooses this Captain Richard Coote, a 32-year-old, already a rock star in the Royal Navy. Already in 1813, he's captured or sunk 22 American ships in Long Island Sound, just in 1813 alone.
And think about that, archaeologically, think about all the ships that are there.
Right. So Coote still has to get up the river. He still has to get over the Saybrook Bar. Can't be done with the warship. And we know it up in Essex, so we figure we're fine building privateers up there. But what the British do is they bring 2 big warships from New London. It's only 15 miles away. They anchor them off of the mouth of the river, just outside the Saybrook Bar, and they deploy 136 officers, sailors, and Marines in 6 really big rowboats. And these are rowboats that can carry 35 men each and cannons. And so they row up the river. And the first thing they have to do is stop just north of Fenwick on Saybrook Point, where America had a fort, and they've got to take out the fort. But the fort was totally abandoned. They stormed the fort and found nobody in it, no guns, no munitions. And this is where the really cool story comes in. Connecticut didn't want to be part of this war, nor did Massachusetts or Rhode Island. In fact, we almost seceded from the Union. Our best trading partner was Great Britain. Why would we want to fight a war with Great Britain? But the war, we got into the war because the South and the Western expansionist states who wanted to move into the Western territories like Michigan. So they wanted to get the British out of there so that we could get the Indians out of there. Well, Connecticut didn't want anything to do with it. And in fact, we said that no Connecticut troops would serve the federal cause under federal officers. We'll serve in Connecticut, we'll defend our state. So the federal government that pays for all the defensive forts said, we won't supply your fort and keep it open unless your men serve under federal officers. And our governor said, we won't do that. So during this pivotal moment, the fort was unmanned. So the British get back in their boats. Now they row 5 miles up to Essex against the current. You can imagine rowing these big boats at night against the current. And they arrive at Essex at 3:30 in the morning, and this is now April 8th, 1814. Essex was a small town. It was part of Saybrook, actually. Our militia was scattered, and at 3:30 in the morning, I would say
Surprise.
there was, very surprised. There was probably, with a tiny bit of alarm, there was about a dozen to 20 men maximum gathered on the waterfront in Essex as the British rode into the harbor. So imagine you're one of these dozen guys, and you've got your squirrel hunting rifle and one little tiny cannon, and you've been told from somebody that the British are coming up the river. First of all, you don't believe them, because the British couldn't come up the river because of the Saybrook Bar. So you're saying this is probably a hoax. This is probably a big panic down in Saybrook. But then all of a sudden you start hearing something or feeling something out in the harbor. So our guys with no orders, because none of our officers had arrived yet, we were so disorganized, so just a bunch of guys, they start shooting their muskets into the night. And then they shoot their cannon out into the harbor, thinking, well, that's going to scare off whoever it is. So the British fire back from 6 different locations from these boats, and they've got big cannons. I mean, they've got cannons that fire 24-pound cannonballs that go half a mile, and then all the muskets of the Royal Marines. Just overwhelming firepower is unleashed into the town. The first ball went right through the town schoolhouse. Second ball went up a half a mile into town.
And all of this is found because of archaeological digs.
Well, it's found because we researched it. I've always said that there's 2 battles of Essex. The first one took 24 hours. The second one has taken us about 5 years to find out what really happened. So to quickly finish the story of what happened, so the British land, They confront a group of citizens who are like, what the heck is going on? And Captain Coote says, hey folks, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is I've come here with overwhelming strength, overwhelming power, and we're going to burn all the ships in your harbor. Not just the privateers that you're building, we're going to burn all the ships. Good news is we haven't come here to burn your houses, steal your silverware, or wreck your lawns. As long as you stay out of our way, nobody's going to get hurt, as long as you stay out of our way. So a big myth has been that Essex capitulated, that we signed some sort of an agreement with the British. You can burn our ships as long as you don't hurt our town. And that didn't happen. That's all folklore. It's just that these people had no way. The British were already in the town. The Marines, who'd been fighting Napoleon for 20 years, they're in the town. So the people get out of the way. The women and children, pack up their valuables and go to Centerbrook. The men start going into the harbor trying to extinguish the ships that are being set on fire because the British are just burning everything in the harbor. By 10 o'clock the next morning, now it's broad daylight. Now it's a bit different. It's 136 men deep into American territory. They know that the alarm has gone out and it's time for them to leave. So they take our two best privateers, the Eagle and the Young Anaconda, and they're going to sail them down the river. Because when you capture an enemy warship, the captain and the crew of the British Navy guys, they would be awarded big piece of the value of these ships.
Sure.
It's the prize system. That was the incentive for the Navy. So they sail these down the river with their 6 boats alongside. But halfway down the river, because the wind was against them now, they went aground. And now the same American militia that had to run the night before starts gathering in the trees and shooting at the British. They anchor one ship and they burn the ship that's aground. Meanwhile, we're sending off to New London for hundreds of reinforcements. We're bringing cannons to the bluffs where the Baldwin Bridge is now. And so Captain Coote in his boat is looking with his spyglass, and he can see this. So there's no way in the world he's going to survive a trip down the river, and we knew that. We thought he'd give up. Instead, he decided he was going to sit right there exposed in the river until nightfall to get out. And we just couldn't believe that. But we knew he had to come through this gauntlet of guns, so we figured, okay, sooner or later, we're going to blast him out of the water. By the middle of the afternoon, he hadn't budged. Our militia on shore weren't really hurting him because he still had all those Marines and cannons. So we sent out a surrender ultimatum. We rode out with a white flag, had this wonderful little handwritten surrender note saying, Captain Coote, you did an amazing job last night, let's face it. You destroyed 25 ships, which is already the largest single loss of American shipping during the War of 1812. But now, there's not a chance that you folks are going to survive the trip down the river. You're all going to die. So in the name of humanity, Captain Coote, do the right thing and surrender. And this American officer thinks he's going to be handed Captain Coote's sword in surrender. Instead, Captain Coote reads this note, and he writes in his log, which we have. He says, all the words were misspelled, the penmanship was sloppy. He hands the note back to the American officer, and he won't even dignify it with a written response. He just said, tell your bosses, I'm really grateful for your concern about us, but we hold your power to detain us at defiance. In other words, we don't think you can stop us. So the American rows back with this message to give to his officers. And as he's leaving, the British start singing God Save the King in the river.
So how does this end?
What ends is that night, it's getting dark. Captain Coote's waiting for darkness so he can burn the other big ship and then row out the river past this gauntlet of cannons. The Americans are hoping he moves before nightfall. Finally, we realize he's not going to move before nightfall, and we could miss him. So we race to get a gun crew through the backwoods right next to where he is, and at point-blank range, open fire on him. And just as he's getting his men in the boats, we open up with this cannon point-blank range, kill 2 Royal Marines, injure a couple of guys, but the British now rowing down the river. Pitch blackness settles down. Our gun is firing so fast and hot that its ammunition box blows up. Now the guys a mile down the river in the bluffs, they hear all this, so they know it's their turn next, so they're getting ready. But it's threatening rain, there's no moon, it's pitch black. They cannot see the British in the river. The British are laying down on the bottom of these big rowboats being carried out by the current. So the Americans just start shooting into the night. So on both sides of the river, there's cannons going off and gunfire going off. And the British get past them. Then the British get adjacent the fort, which was abandoned the night before. Of course, now the fort's fully manned. And so the guys in the fort are firing everything they have off into the darkness. And then they stop and listen. If they can, where are the British? Where are the British? And then they hear about 1,000 men out in the harbor yelling, hip, hip, hooray. It's all the other British warships which have come from New London had been waiting for them, and all the crews are cheering because the men have made it back. So 24 hours after it began, 2 men dead, 2 men injured, but they burned 27 American ships. And then this disappeared out of history, because a couple months later, the British attacked Stonington, which was very high profile. Then they burned Washington, which got a lot of press. Then Andrew Jackson, the Battle of New Orleans, and then the war ended. And the country moved on, and although within a month after the raid, 90 newspaper articles were written all across the country, and the British guys were all given medals back in England and promotions, this just fell out of the history books. And so I was told 2 things. No bullets, no battlefield. So we had to find physical evidence of the battle. And people also said, if you don't have a book, you don't have a battle. Stonington had a book. So we set about to get some state grants and some federal grants. Unfortunately, we were persuasive, telling this story literally to folks. And we got a great grant to hire a researcher in England and researchers to augment our team here. So we spent 2 years just finding all the information.
And artifacts.
Well, first finding the information. First proving there was a battle, getting the logbooks of the British ships from the British. Then we got, based on that, we got state battle site status in 2012. And then we got a grant from the federal government to go find the battle site. So we had the story. Now we had to go physically marry the story to the land. And that meant archaeologists. And we hired the team from the Massachusetts Pequot Museum. They've got an amazing research center.
They sure do.
With Kevin McBride, and he brought his young team of really great folks. And so basically I spent all of last summer with all of this documentation with Kevin saying, well, based on this, I would dig over there, or I would dig in those bluffs.
Biggest surprise on the dig?
Biggest surprise, we found a new shipwreck. We found a new shipwreck. I had given a talk much like this at the Connecticut River
You're quite
Museum.
the storyteller. I didn't have to say anything. This is great. You're good at this. While you're still talking, we have a few pictures that I just want to show. We have the book, of course. This ship that we're talking about, you see it right here, Jerry.
Yeah, that's the HMS La Hogue, the command ship off of New London that the American people tried to blow up.
It was nasty battles back then, I'll tell you. What else do we have here?
This is the archaeologist. Yeah, this is the archaeologist digging on the grounds. And
where exactly was this?
This here is down in Saybrook, kind of behind where Dock and Dine is. There's an area where the old fort used to be, and so we found quite a few things down there. And then I got a call from someone. Here it is, right here. This is actually stunning, although it doesn't look like it there. I got a call from a fellow after I gave one of these talks, and he said, I heard you talk about this privateer, the Young Anaconda, which the British burned. He said, I know where it is. It's like 200 years later, you know where the Young Anaconda is? I said, where? He said, under my dock. So I grabbed the archaeologist. We went and met with him. And he's got this dock, sticking out halfway down the Connecticut River from Essex. And under the dock is this pile of stones, which most people would think are just field stones.
Sure.
And he said, I've been looking at these stones for 20 years wondering what they were. I heard your story, and I think that's the wreck of the ship the British burned. And sure enough, we measured it out, and all wooden sailing ships had to have ballast stone, stones about this big, in the bottom to keep them from tipping over from the wind. Well, long after the ships burn, and the British did burn this ship, the ballast stone stays forever. So at low tide, you could see the ballast stone. So based on this, we sent a team on his lawn, and we found about 40 musket balls. So there's the ship, there's the evidence of the battle between the Americans on shore, and this was just one micro battlefield within this 7-mile.
Sure.
We had to get about 120 people along the river, a lot of them people with very exclusive estates, and say, can we come and dig up your lawn for 2 weeks? And they all said yes. In fact, they came out usually and helped us.
That's the nutmeg way,
Oh,
right?
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. And
what did you learn by this? There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in this to tell folks about this battle nearly 200 years ago. What did you come away with feeling about our state, about what happened then?
Well, I think, first of all, we set the records straight. There was a major battle here that had gone unrecognized. It just kind of shoved under the table. We learned that the Americans put up a far greater defense than had been assumed, because people thought that the British came and landed, the Americans ran away, and they burned our ships, and we said, see ya. And it didn't happen that way at all. It was a big event. And because of this battle, soon after it, finally the federal and the state government started working together a little bit more. The rest of the coast was armed, so that when Stonington was attacked a couple months later, Stonington had some brand new cannons and were able to fight the British off. So it changed a lot. It definitely damaged some of the great shipbuilding dynasties in Essex, that, because they lost most of the ships. But Just this past weekend, we celebrated this. We finally we did a reenactment. We got a bunch of British guys to attack the town from the water, and I will tell you, the town is just beaming with pride. You know, something that nobody had even talked about 10 years ago much, except for this strange parade. Now there's banners all over town, and it's
And
pretty
you
exciting.
brought it home.
Well, and I had a team. A lot of people helped. It was very, very exciting.
Jerry Roberts, thanks so much for coming on
Thank
and
you.
sharing the story and setting the record straight for Essex.
Thank you so much.